Brook in the latest One Piece chapter hints that he may have history with the God's Knights, where he appears to recognize Kunko, possibly knowing who she really is. This is not the first time the story has hinted at Brook's hidden past. Brook has a lot of moments like this throughout One Piece, where he time and again shows that he knows things about this world that none of the other Straw Hats do. This makes me ask the question, who actually is Brook? He's now been in the story for almost 20 years, yet we still know barely anything about his life before he entered the Grand Line, and even less about who he was before he became a pirate. What actually is Brook's history with the God's Knights? But more importantly, what do we at the end of the day even know about the musician of the Straw Hat Pirates? While this video started with me just trying to uncover Brook's hidden past, looking into this made me stumble on something huge, where Brook may genuinely know where the One Piece is, but he himself hasn't realized this. When Brook originally pledged to follow Luffy at the end of Thriller Bark, he revealed that he in the past was a leader of a battle convoy in a certain kingdom. This is something that was hinted much earlier in the arc, when Brook was fighting Ryuma. Brook during the fight says that this mysterious kingdom is where he had learned how to sword fight, and that Brook took a lot of pride in his past. It has never been confirmed what the name of this kingdom actually was, but we do actually know the sea where it was located, when Brook at the end of the arc reveals that his homeland is in the West Blue. Even though the Straw Hats have never sailed there, the West Blue is a really important place in the story, as it is the sea where one of the biggest events in all of One Piece happened. The West Blue is in fact the sea that held the island of God Valley. Now, what I would like to discuss next is this one possibility. What if Brook's home country was in fact the kingdom of God Valley? The God Valley incident happened 38 years before the current story, which means that by the time the island became a battleground between Rox and Roger, Brook in the timeline was long gone, and had already spent years trapped in the Florian Triangle. What this means is that decades ago when Brook was still a young man, God Valley was just a normal country that existed in the West Blue. Normal is not exactly the right word to use here, however. God Valley was a very special country even before the God Valley incident, where it was one of the very few countries in the story unaffiliated with the world government. The reason why the Celestial Dragons went there in the first place was to conquer God Valley for the government, and this was because of the island's vast natural resources. This begs the question, why hadn't the government tried to invade God Valley before? The world government had at this point been in power for almost 800 years, and the only countries that we know of in the story that have been able to resist them have been either those hidden from them or those with a very powerful military. I think this was the reason why God Valley had managed to stay independent for so long. The island was evidently not out of the government's reach, which could mean that for hundreds of years they may have possessed a very strong military. This could have been Brook's true origin story, where the military he spoke of all the way back in Thriller Bark could have been that of God Valleys. It could also answer one of the big unanswered questions about Brook's past, and this question is why he became a pirate. Brook seemingly held a lot of pride in both his country and in being a soldier, so him deciding to become a criminal is rather surprising. Only, Brook himself might have never even made this decision. The Kingdom of God Valley had apparently always opposed the world government, and the government treats essentially everyone who fights against them as a criminal, and they don't hesitate to label these kinds of people as pirates. This was for example what happened to Pedro, where he was just an explorer looking for the Poneglyphs, but this was enough for the government to designate him as a pirate. It is interesting that Pedro is one of the few non-Straw Hat characters Brook has ever gotten close to in the story, where even if they didn't know it, Pedro and Brook could have been kindred spirits in this regard. If Brook was a soldier in the God Valley's military where he fought against the government, he could have become a pirate through sheer circumstance. This background could also explain what Brook has revealed in the latest chapter, where decades ago he might have had to defend God Valley from the God's Knights. There's a lot of evidence in the story that the God's Knights' role in the world government is the conquering of new lands. This is very literally what the Knights are currently doing in the Elepath arc, but more importantly, it is also what they were doing at God Valley 38 years ago. When the government came to the island, the Marines only set up a perimeter around the area, and it was the God's Knights themselves who subdued the locals. Considering how valuable the island supposedly was, I think it's very possible that the God's Knights had tried to conquer God Valley many times over in the past, and that Brook could have had to defend his home from them when he was young. but this could also explain how he knows Kunko. If Kunko was one of the God's Knights Brook fought against decades ago, it would make perfect sense why he'd be shocked to see her on Elbaf. Brook likely thinks that everyone from that time in his life should be dead, so him not only seeing Kunko again, but her still looking incredibly young, should naturally surprise the heck out of Brook. We've already seen that Kunko has several of the special abilities displayed by the 5 elders, so it is very possible that she also has their longevity, where Saturn for example looked exactly the same 200 years ago as he did during the Egghead arc. If Brook and Kunko met literally decades ago, it is one hell of a coincidence that she in the current story has become a fan of Brook's music. If they met in the distant past though, I am not sure if Kunko even remembers Brook, where her interest in him seems to be purely because of his music as the Soul King, which is something Brook only started doing in the last 2 years. This is still just a theory, but Brook being from God Valley could very well tie together his secret past in the West Blue to his connection with the God's Knights. It would also make the story a lot more personal once we finally learn the truth about the God Valley incident, if the island was actually the home of one of the Straw Hats. Conveniently, God Valley in the story has actually never been brought up in a scene where Brook himself was present, so it would make sense why he hasn't mentioned anything about it. As we know, many of the Straw Hats actually have secrets in their past they don't like talking about, particularly when it comes to traumatic events. There is however one more detail which I'd like to connect to this theory, which is Pink's Sake. This is the song Brook sang in his first scene, but as most fans know, the song is far more important than just a random piece of music, where it was also sung by both Shanks and Roger. We also hear that out of all of the other Straw Hats besides Brook and Luffy, the only one who knew of this song was Robin. The lyrics of this song make a lot of inferences to some of the most important concepts in One Piece, such as the moon, the sun, and the dawn. What is also interesting is that it is said to be a song sung by the pirates of old, which has now become a very noteworthy detail in the final saga. This is because Vegapunk has now revealed that the very first pirate in history was Joy Boy. This not only means that Pink's Sake was a song created in the last 900 years, but what Vegapunk's revelation also means is that pirates in this world have for their entire existence opposed Imu and the government, making the song's connection to the main story of One Piece that much stronger. Here is however one more key detail about Pink's Sake. Of the confirmed characters who know about it, Brook, Robin and Shanks are all from the West Blue. Not only this, but Robin says that the song makes her nostalgic, which could very well mean that she heard it as a kid growing up in that sea. The song also wasn't just Brook's favorite song, but the favorite of the whole Rumbar Pirates crew, who were a crew from the West Blue. But the most interesting detail to me is that Shanks very literally has a scene in the story where he, just like in the song, delivers sake to Whitebeard, and Shanks says that it is sake from his hometown in the West Blue and that it tastes better than any other drink in the world. While some of you may have made the connection, I do not however think this is related to God Valley. God Valley was said to have literally vanished after the incident, which would mean that even though it was the place where Roger found Shanks, Shanks himself had to grow up on another island in the West Blue. The important detail here, however, is the sea itself. There is essentially an overwhelming amount of evidence that there is a connection between Pink's Sake and the West Blue, where the song was very important to all these characters who grew up in this sea. Couple this with the fact that the song has always been sung by those who oppose Imu, that it was sung by Roger himself, and that the lyrics themselves are laden with hints about the greater One Piece story. Let's say this all isn't just a coincidence, and that just to humor the idea, there is a genuine connection between the song and the actual One Piece treasure. One of the important things about the song is in reference to the sun, how it rises in the morning and sets in the evening. This is also a visual we see many times in Brook's backstory, depicting the Rumbar Pirates' journey from the West Blue to the Grand Line, which is the first and only time in the story where we see the full lyrics to Pink's Sake. Now, here is another thing commonly said about the sun from real life. It rises in the east and sets in the west. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but Luffy's journey started in the East Blue, in a place called Dawn Island. And Oda has indeed confirmed that Luffy's journey will end when he finds the One Piece. We also now know that Luffy's devil fruit is not actually a rubber fruit, but the sun god fruit, which would mean that, in a way, Luffy's journey is the journey of the sun. It's just an idea, but it could be that Luffy is also traveling from east to west, and that he will find both the One Piece and the end of his tale in the West Blue. I would at this point like to come clean and say that this is only one of the many theories that I personally like about where the One Piece is located. I have, for example, for months had a thumbnail and title ready for a video where I'd break down why the treasure could in fact be located in the East Blue, and that theory actually narrows it down not just to the sea, but to the actual island. Still, this is the first world problem of being a One Piece YouTuber, where there's always 1,000 videos you would like to make, but can never get to covering all of them. This is also mainly because you just keep coming up with new stuff, which is literally what happened to me here, where this all just started from me talking about Brook's connection with the God's Knights. And there is still so much I need to cover in this video about this latest chapter. Brook and Kunko knowing each other, and the God's Knights being possibly hundreds of years old like the Elders, is definitely unexpected. This is because Carling, the supreme commander of the God's Knights, has very visibly aged a ton from Kuma's flashback to the present. What I however think is even more interesting is that some of the Marines apparently know about the God's Knights having these special powers. Sol in this chapter revealed that he had not only seen Saint Summers before, but that he actually knew the God's Knights were immortal. I think this was something that was set up in the previous arc, where the only Marines allowed to see Saint Saturn's powers were those ranked Vice Admiral or higher. Then later in Egghead, the Vice Admirals are perfectly okay with seeing Saturn in his transformed demonic state. I personally overlooked this detail when it happened, but this all may well mean that the Vice Admirals know a lot more about the world government's dark secrets than they let on. I know a lot of us expect the Marines to turn on the government at some point during the final saga, but it may actually be that every high-ranked Marine is way more deep in with the Celestial Dragons than we might have thought. If this is indeed information given to the Vice Admirals, then even mostly good Marines like Garp and Smoker may have known that the top Celestial Dragons had these abnormal powers, yet they still chose to work for them. It's not even so much that some of the Celestial Dragons are able to do things like regenerate and teleport that is the problem. It's more so that these aren't abilities that can be explained away by devil fruits, haki, or any known powers in the story, which should make them extremely suspicious to anyone working for the Celestial Dragons. The Celestial Dragons also clearly realize this, as they deliberately hide their powers from the lower-ranking Marines. The Elders also seemingly have a lot of trust in the Vice Admirals, where they've throughout the story allowed them in Pangaea Castle, and even to face-to-face meetings with them. This does not necessarily mean that every Marine ranked Vice Admiral and higher is 100% behind the government, as they clearly aren't, but it does seem to indicate that they are pretty deep in with the Celestial Dragons business, even if they don't want to be. I said in my previous chapter video that Robin deliberately hiding from Summers made Summers look pretty strong, but it's now looking like she's going to fight both him and Kunko. Even though Robin getting this kind of shine is cool, I still have no idea how she can fight these characters, since the only confirmed way to harm this regeneration ability is still seemingly Conqueror's Haki, and Robin isn't even a Haki user. She could however in theory defeat the Knights with Sea Stone, since both Kunko and Summers are confirmed Devil Fruit users, but I don't think there's anything in the story that suggests that Robin has any Sea Stone equipment. Ironically, this may mean that the character best equipped to fight the God's Knights in the Sun World is actually Lilith, if she still has her bubble gun. I personally think the best bet is that Robin is simply going to play support to Gaban, who might actually be a Conqueror's Haki user, but what I'm actually hoping for is that the story with Robin finally reveals a way to fight these immortal characters without Conquerors. I do also question her decision a bit in this chapter, where the crew getting captured and kids being murdered wasn't enough for her to take action, but books getting burned is when she snaps. As someone who also reads books basically every day, I can kind of understand, but sheesh. I also have next to no idea how this plot with the God's Knights is supposed to play out, where despite what the end of the chapter shows, it really is not just Gaban and Robin they're up against. Frankie, Dory and Brocky are all still in the God's Knights vicinity as well, but far more importantly, Gillingham said that Summer's transmission was nationwide, so the monster trio should have also heard it, and at this point, I really don't see why they wouldn't also intervene. Summers and Gillingham both in this very chapter say that they don't want to mess with Luffy, and the final saga has already established that you need special permission to engage with an emperor. So really, we're just lining up excuses for the God's Knights to retreat from Elbaf at this point. We already know they can just instantly go back to the Holy Land via the magic circle, and if that doesn't work, they could literally just be punted out, like what happened with Mars in the last arc. I guess the one wild card in this situation is Jarl, where he could actually just submit the country to the God's Knights, since they are literally threatening his great-great-granddaughter. But even if Jarl did submit, I don't think this would solve anything, since he really doesn't have any say over what the Straw Hats will do. Though I suppose this could be a gambit the God's Knights would use to blackmail the Giants to turn on the Straw Hats. I also have to say, so far, this storyline of the God's Knights kidnapping children is probably the least interesting part of the final saga for me. Even if we narrow it down to just Elbaf, I'm definitely taking everything regarding Loki, the mural, Gaban's introduction, or even the opening in Legoland, over this subplot. I guess it's still more interesting than Wano Act 2 though. And speaking of Wano, in this cover story, it was confirmed that Raizo is the new Daimyo of Udon. This still leaves Hakumai and Ringo up for grabs among the rest of the scabbards, I think. It is going to be shocking if Kawamatsu is not revealed to be the Daimyo of Ringo, with something like a scene of him finally being with Onimaru again in this cover story. Yamato should however be going to Hakumai next, to take the katana to Yasue's grave. And the only scabbard we haven't yet seen besides Kawamatsu in this cover story is Kiku. So I guess the next daimyo of Hakumai would more than likely be her. I didn't know this before looking it up, but even though there were 0 female shoguns in Japanese history, there were actually some female daimyo. So really, there should be nothing stopping Kiku from getting the title. This is the nice thing about One Piece, where even though it's fiction, you learn so many things from real life by reading it. I also have a personal lesson to share to all my subscribers, which is that if you click the join button of this video, you will get your wallet looted by my channel. Thank you to all my current victims for all their loot. You were all handsomely rewarded with members only videos in return. But if you're not yet a victim, join up, because you'll get the same treatment. Anyway, appreciate you guys for watching this video to the end. Take care.